Imagine this. You wake before dawn to the soft blue of a phone screen, the glow touching your face like a hand you didn't invite. Notifications march across the glass like soldiers, each promising connection, each demanding it. Your room is quiet, too quiet to explain why your pulse already knots. But your mind is crowded, as if a city has been built overnight inside your skull. You didn't lay the bricks. You didn't sign the permits. Yet the traffic is relentless. In that moment, you're not alone, and not with anyone either, suspended in a limbo where intimacy is simulated and silence is treated like a fault to be corrected. You rise, you scroll, you breathe in tiny sips. A clip makes you laugh for half a second. Then you chase the next laugh because half a second can't carry a day. You notice how effortless it is to be in 1,000 places at once, and how exhausting it is to belong to none of them. The coffee tastes like an alarm. The mirror shows a face that's been trained to perform fine on cue. Somewhere, a part of you wonders, when did solitude become the enemy? Who signed the treaty that declared silence an act of war? Consider the paradox that has slipped into your life unnoticed. The more connection you accumulate, the less connected you feel. You answer messages faster and understand yourself less. You consume other people's lives in high definition, while your own interiority blurs at the edges. You call this progress because the infrastructure is so impressive. The networks, the platforms, the omnipresent access. Yet a primitive ache continues to ask for something simple and unbranded. You start to suspect that the ache isn't a glitch. It is the original operating system, throttled by updates you never asked to install. You weren't always like this. There were afternoons long ago when boredom stretched like a road and you walked it without fear. You stared out of bus windows and let your mind wander to places with no name. You waited for the kettle, for the friend who arrived late, for the pen to remember your hand. Waiting had space in it, and in that space you discovered yourself. Today, waiting is a rite of humiliation, something to abolish, as if the soul itself were a queue that must be skipped. What if the queue was the point? What if the person you're trying to become only arrives in the time you're trying to erase? Here's the contradiction you live inside. You crave meaning, but you're allergic to the conditions that meaning requires. Meaning asks for attention, undivided, unoptimized, unmonetized attention. It asks for boredom's corridor, for an hour without pings, for the courage to hear your own unedited thoughts. But the world sells you a different courage, the courage to keep up, to reply instantly, to remain perpetually available. You wear availability like armor and find it porous. It lets everyone in and lets you leak out. Sometimes you try to reclaim the old quiet. You leave the phone in another room. You light a candle because you heard ritual helps. You sit on the floor and breathe. The first minute is relief. The second minute is restlessness. By the third, your mind begins a courtroom drama. What are you missing? Who needs you? What if the opportunity evaporates because you weren't watching it? The defense calls its primary witness, your fear of irrelevance. The prosecution calls yours, your abandoned self. The verdict is postponed indefinitely, because every time the gavel rises, a new notification pleads for a recess. Look closer. Notice how solitude has been rebranded in your vocabulary as loneliness, how silence is confused with emptiness, how privacy is made suspicious. As if anything not public were half alive. You post to prove your existence, and the proof expires in 24 hours. You live by a clock that is not attached to the sun, but to the churn. The churn is hungry. The churn must be fed. What would happen if you let it starve for a day? What would you discover in the sounds that remain? The air conditioner's sigh, the whisper of your own breath, the steady drum of your heart, asking unspectacular questions. Ask yourself, at what point did you outsource your inner witness to an audience? When did applause become the permission you wait for before you change your life? Who taught you that solitude is a problem to be solved rather than a place to be inhabited? There is a reason you avoid that place. It is not empty. It is full of mirrors. In solitude, you will see not only what you love and desire, but what you've betrayed to be loved and desired. It is easier to keep moving. It is easier to let the world speak for you, to adopt its slogans as thoughts and its metrics as values, to declare, "I'm fine," in a language you didn't author. Yet some nights, after the last glow fades and your room remembers it is dark, something wakes up. A quiet intelligence, older than your habits, stands at the edge of your bed and asks the question beneath all questions. Who are you when no one is watching? You don't answer, not because you don't know, but because you do, and you've been avoiding it. What if solitude is not a withdrawal from life, but a deeper arrival? What if the war against it is a war against your most precise instrument of truth? Hold that thought. Hold it like you would a match in the wind. There's a reason the match keeps going out, and it's not just distraction. Forces older than your apps and louder than your calendar have been turning the volume down on your inner life for a long time. If you trace the wires back, through psychology, through philosophy, through the economies of attention, you will find the hidden circuitry that powers this war. And once you see the circuitry, you will understand why your discomfort with solitude is not a personal failure, but a designed outcome. Let's find the source. You follow the wire back and discover it isn't a single cable, but a braided rope. Psychology, philosophy, economy, culture, each strand pulling tight whenever you try to be alone. The hidden problem isn't just that your attention is captured. It's that the modern world has quietly rewritten your relationship to yourself. Solitude used to be a meeting. Now it's a malfunction. How did that shift happen? Why does an empty room feel like a threat instead of a sanctuary? Start with your own mind. Beneath the smooth surface of habit are older drives, the animal intelligence that keeps watch for exclusion, because once exclusion meant death. Your nervous system is a scholar of tribes. It knows in its bones that being left behind is lethal. So every ping is not just a message, but a signal. You are still inside the circle. Ignore enough signals, and your body floods you with little alarms. Unease, the ache of FOMO, the sudden suspicion that you've committed a social sin without noticing. In operant conditioning terms, you've been trained by intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes the message delivers pleasure, sometimes pain. The uncertainty hooks you more firmly than any guarantee could. How do you sit in a quiet room against a system that makes rest feel dangerous and noise feel safe? Carl Jung would say you have exiled your shadow to the outskirts of awareness, the impulses, griefs, and truths that don't fit your public story. Solitude is the border crossing where the shadow waits. Avoid the crossing, avoid the encounter. Individuation, the process of becoming a whole person, requires that you face what you've banished. Yet an economy that profits from your distraction profits from your unfinishedness. A fractured self clicks more than a complete one. Have you noticed how the world offers endless mirrors for the persona, but almost none for the soul? Friedrich Nietzsche warned about the herd, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. The comforting warmth of shared opinion can become a narcotic that numbs the will to become who you are. He described the last man, blinking and content, allergic to danger, allergic to depth, allergic to solitude because solitude births dangerous ideas. If solitude is where the unapproved self is forged, what happens to a culture that sterilizes it? What happens to you? when you stop being the blacksmith of your identity and become the shop window for it. Arthur Schopenhauer divided suffering into two poles, want and boredom. You swing between them like a pendulum. The world, to keep the pendulum from resting, floods you with micro-wants and micro-reliefs, the itch of a notification, the micro-triumph of a reply. But boredom, the fertile kind that precedes insight, has been mislabeled as failure. Schopenhauer's bleak kindness was to admit that the will is insatiable. Therefore, serenity demands a different relationship to desire. Solitude is the workshop where that relationship is renegotiated. Who benefits when that workshop is condemned as uninhabitable? Aldous Huxley imagined a world pacified not by whips, but by soma, the pill that dissolves the friction of consciousness. You don't swallow tablets, you scroll. Your feed is liquid soma, pleasant, frictionless, and endlessly replenishing. It smooths the interior surfaces where thought might catch and spark. Solitude, by contrast, is textured. It resists you. It scrapes away your slogans and leaves you raw and thinking. How long can a civilization run on smoothness before it forgets how to climb? Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about the gaze of the other, the way you become an object in someone else's vision and begin to live as if their gaze were a court. Publicness multiplies gazes. The court is always in session. Solitude removes the jury and asks you to judge yourself. That's terrifying if you have outsourced your conscience to applause. Sartre called the self-deception that avoids responsibility bad faith. You might recognize its symptoms: performative empathy without costly compassion, loudly espoused values that never mature into action. Why seek a room where your excuses echo, when you could stand forever in a hallway full of clapping? Viktor Frankl, who endured a world built for despair, insisted on the will to meaning. He observed that humans can bear almost any how if they have a why. But meaning, like a wild animal, doesn't step into fluorescent light. It appears in the half-dark of solitude, when your attention is patient enough to hear what your life asks of you. Our culture sells ready-made whys, which function like costumes, identity as subscription. But a costume cannot survive the silence of an empty room. It falls to the floor, and you're left with the question, what is worth suffering for? If you never enter that room, how could you possibly know? Zoom out from the mind into the machine. Industrial time taught your ancestors to trust the factory bell more than the sun. The bell became the boss of attention. Later, Taylorism shaved seconds from motions, disciplining bodies to efficiency. Today, surveillance capitalism disciplines your mind in the same way, shaving seconds from your solitude and selling them. Your attention is auctioned. Your boredom is harvested. Your preferences are predicted and then backfilled into you until you mistake the plantation for a garden. Is it any wonder that solitude feels like trespassing? The earth you stand on has been fenced off and monetized. There is neuroscience here too, not as a tyrant, but as a lantern. The default mode network, the brain's architecture for self-referential thought, autobiographical memory, and future simulation, lights up during rest, daydreaming, wandering attention. It is the fabric where narrative identity is woven from memory and possibility. Starve it of rest, and the cloth thins. You become easy to tear. Continuous stimuli force your attentional networks into reactive loops. You live on the surface of moments, skimming like a stone that forgot how to sink. When was the last time you let yourself sink and trusted that the lake would hold you? Urban design has joined the conspiracy, not with malice, but with momentum. The third place becomes a brand. The park becomes an event. The bench becomes a marketing opportunity. Everywhere music, everywhere screens. Even nature is narrated. 10 hikes you must take. Must, the verb, colonizes. The forest hears a word it cannot pronounce and falls silent. You snap a photo for proof. Proof of what? Being there, or being perceived being there. Beneath all of this lies a metaphysical error, confusing noise with life. Life is dense, yes, but density is not synonymous with acceleration. The heart has only one tempo that sustains, the one it learned in the womb, slow enough to nourish, steady enough to endure. The world demands sprinting. Solitude teaches pacing. One keeps you current, the other keeps you human. Which do you fear losing more? The hidden problem, then, is not simply that solitude is scarce. It is that solitude has been reframed from resource to risk, from medicine to malady. A society that treats inner silence as suspicious will design institutions, technologies, and rituals that rescue you from yourself. When rescue becomes routine, you forget you were never drowning. But forgetting does not cancel consequence. A psyche avoided will find other ways to speak, through anxiety, compulsions, hostility, numbness. A culture allergic to inwardness will display its symptoms in public policy, in art that distracts instead of discloses, in leaders who perform conviction without ever meeting their own souls. If the roots run this deep, what fruits have we been eating without realizing their origin? What unseen costs are we already paying for the convenience of never being alone? Hold the question. You've traced the wire back to the wall and felt the hum. In the next room, the circuitry powers outcomes you can measure. Habits, moods, relationships, economies. You sense the bill arriving, but haven't opened it yet. Let's open it. Open the bill. It doesn't arrive as a number. It arrives as a texture. You feel it in the way your mornings begin with a tremor, in the way you nod during conversations, while a portion of your mind keeps scanning as if a predator might step out from behind the next notification. The first consequence is physiological, a body trained to micro-startle. Your sympathetic nervous system keeps a finger on the trigger, simmering just below a boil. You call it stress, as if it were merely an overflow of tasks. It is also an underflow of stillness. Without intervals of true quiet, your baseline never resets. The dial twists toward vigilance. Sleep becomes a negotiation. You wake already mid-sprint. This chronic vigilance rewires attention. Think of your mind like a lens that used to open and close, dilating for wide fields, constricting for detail. Now it flickers, always braced for interruption. The consequence is attentional residue, the cognitive smog left behind when you switch contexts too fast and too often. You attempt deep work and find yourself submerged in the ghost of 12 half-finished thoughts. You blame willpower, but the culprit is the invisible tax of perpetual partial engagement. How can you gather yourself? Layer in the availability heuristic. What you can easily recall feels more common, more urgent, more real. Your mental library is stocked by algorithms that prefer novelty and outrage. What appears often seems important. What is quiet vanishes. You overestimate the world's chaos because chaos is well lit, and undercount the world's meaning because meaning whispers. Your priorities reorganize around salience rather than significance. You begin to live according to what interrupts you, instead of what calls you. Is it any wonder your calendar feels captured by emergencies that evaporate upon inspection? The next consequence slips into your identity, the audience effect. When you internalize the gaze, you edit before you think. The draft dies in the throat. You attempt to write, to pray, to reason, and a phantom crowd leans over your shoulder, offering premature feedback. You don't need censors when your own prefrontal cortex volunteers to police you in advance. The imagination, which once roamed widely in private meadows, begins to graze close to the fence. Will they like this? Replaces "is this true?" And eventually, "is this me?" becomes a question you're too busy to ask. Solitude starvation also distorts desire. Without quiet, you cannot distinguish between authentic longing and mimetic appetite, the contagious wanting René Girard described. You want what others want because wanting is social glue. Wanting solo feels risky. In the glare of constant comparison, desire becomes competitive rather than contemplative, acquisitive rather than orienting. You pursue a life that photographs well and discover that the image feeds on the thing it represents. The unseen consequence is covetousness disguised as aspiration, and its residue tastes like restlessness. Relationships suffer in a subtler way. You become a tourist of intimacy. With no practice inhabiting your own interiority, you struggle to inhabit another's. You listen to answer rather than to witness. Conversation becomes reciprocal performance. In the absence of personal depth, connection defaults to frictionless exchange, pleasant, efficient, untroubling. But love, the difficult kind that grows a person, requires the awkward silences where truth has time to assemble itself. Without those intervals, you end up close to many and tethered to none. The unseen consequence is loneliness in crowded rooms, a throat-tight loneliness that language can't loosen. Creativity withers too. Originality requires incubation, time where fragments bump in the dark and mate. You have replaced gestation with constant exposure. The mind, denied darkness, becomes sterile light. Ideas arrive half-formed and are published half-lived. You mistake speed for fertility, production for creation. The unseen consequence is a culture of remixes with no mothers, of opinions orphaned from contemplation. You sense this when you repeat a take, and it returns to you like a stranger wearing your voice. There are political consequences that masquerade as mere mood. A populace who cannot be alone is a populace easy to herd, because solitude is where dissent rehearses. A citizenry calibrated to interruption struggles to follow long arguments, to hold complexity without demanding immediate closure. Nuance is expensive. Outrage is discounted. Policy becomes theater. Candidates become content. The unseen consequence is a democracy managed by dopamine. Short cycles, short tempers, short memory. Neuroscience adds another register to the ledger. Deprived of unstructured time, your default mode network's integrative functions weaken. The autobiographical narrative phrase, you feel less like a coherent self and more like a courier delivering parcels of reaction. The hippocampus, which consolidates memory during rest, cannot do its job if rest means scroll. Memories lose their depth of field. Days flatten into a collage of pings. Metacognition, the capacity to think about your thinking, requires a balcony above the street. Without solitude, the building has no stairs. Ethically, the costs deepen. If your attention is perpetually rented out, who is left to answer the door when conscience knocks? Moral imagination thrives on long looks, at history, at consequences, at the face across the table. When you are trained to glance and go, the hard choices default to the convenient ones. You sign terms of service, not only for apps, but for life. Permissions you would decline if you read the fine print slowly. The unseen consequence is complicity by acceleration. Even your spirituality, not necessarily religious, but that felt sense of relation to something larger, erodes without deliberate quiet. Most traditions, across centuries and continents, discovered a counterintuitive law. The sacred enters through silence. Replace silence with stimulus long enough, and transcendence becomes a memory of a memory. You may still use sacred words, but they rattle around uninhabited houses. Practices decay into performances. The unseen consequence is existential anemia, bloodless days that technically function but lack iron. Look at the micro. You sit to eat and watch something because stillness has become spiky. The food registers as background while the plot drives your fork. Satiety cues, which emerge from attentional attunement, are muffled. You overconsume. The same pattern repeats with shopping, news, even grief. You outsource digestion to an algorithm and wonder why nothing nourishes. Your interior metabolism slows until meaning calories pass through you unused. There is also the plain arithmetic of time. Minutes spent preventing aloneness cannot be spent becoming someone. You sense this when birthdays begin to feel like invoices. Where did the year go? Into places you didn't quite choose. Corridors of commentary, rooms of reaction. The paradox deepens. By fleeing solitude to save time, you lose the very hours required to build the life you claim to want. The math is cruel and correct. And yet, for all this, the trap persists because it does not feel like a trap. It feels like participation. To step away seems antisocial, arrogant, unsafe. The culture has pre-installed a moral frame. Engagement equals care. Visibility equals value. Quiet equals withdrawal. This is the final consequence, the keystone. You internalize the war's propaganda. You police your own thresholds. Even when nobody demands your presence, a loyal part of you rushes to surrender it. Where does this leave you? In a house with many rooms you seldom enter. The doors are unlocked. The lights are off. Your name is on the deed. Somewhere within, a thought has been waiting years for a chair. A decision has been waiting for a pen. A grief has been waiting for a hand. You can almost hear them shifting, clearing their throats, gathering in the darkness, just beyond your routines. You stand in the hallway, fingertips on a handle. You have not yet learned how to turn it. You still believe the knob is password protected by the world. It isn't. But opening it will ask something radical of you, something that disobeys 1,000 quiet rules you have never spoken aloud. The traps are real. The costs are measurable. The consequences are intimate. And against all of them, there exists a rebellion, counterintuitive, unfashionable, immensely practical, waiting to be tried. If you listen beneath the noise, you can hear the rehearsal beginning, the breath before a note, the blank page before a confession, the steadying of a hand before it writes a new signature on an old life. Hold that breath. You're about to meet the first principles of freedom, the ones that only emerge when nothing else is playing. Begin by doing the most suspicious thing a modern citizen can do. Make yourself unavailable on purpose. Not as a tantrum, not as a performance, but as a training. Freedom is a muscle. It atrophies when every moment is externally scored. Your rebellion starts with deliberate friction, adding resistance where the world promises glide. You will be told that less friction equals more life, but you have learned the bill for smoothness. So install thresholds, choose 1 hour a day, and make it monastic. Close the doors, not just the digital ones. Turn off the bright, humming world and light a smaller flame. A lamp, a candle, an open window. The ritual matters, because the body needs symbols as much as the mind needs arguments. In this hour, do nothing that produces a metric. No posting, no checking, no products shipped. Read slowly, so slowly the sentences leave fingerprints. Or write a page in longhand. Not to publish, but to learn what your own unmediated voice actually sounds like. You will feel withdrawal. Good. That is not a sign of incompatibility. It is the nervous system renegotiating its treaties. Counterintuitive move 2. Subtract cleverness. Add constraints. Buy a cheap kitchen timer. Set it for 20 minutes. Place the phone in a different room, face down, as if it were sleeping. Put a single page in front of you. A question, a problem, a feeling you've been postponing. Tell yourself you're allowed to be bored, but you're not allowed to leave. You will discover that boredom is not a wall, it is a curtain. If you hold your ground, the curtain parts. On the other side is thought, unspectacular, unsponsored, yours. A third maneuver. Practice secrecy in small, honest doses. In a world that confuses visibility with value, secrecy becomes a revolutionary hygiene. Adopt one practice that nobody knows about. A dawn walk without headphones, a weekly letter to your future self, sealed and stored. A quiet craft done badly in private. Whittling, sketching, playing a single song on a cracked piano. The point is not excellence. The point is sovereignty. What you protect from the gaze becomes a refuge where you do not perform existence, you experience it. History belongs to the disobedient solitaries who returned bearing tools. Nietzsche's mountain walks were not an aesthetic choice, they were a forge. Kierkegaard wrote his rebellions against the herd while strolling Copenhagen's streets alone, composing arguments with his feet. Thoreau's cabin was not a retreat from society, but an experiment in re-entering it awake. May Sarton, in her journals, defended solitude as a greenhouse where the soul could photosynthesize experience into meaning. Their common trait wasn't misanthropy, it was stewardship of interiority. You are not asked to imitate their lives, only to adopt their discipline. Appoint solitude as a tutor rather than a sentence. Rebellion also requires technical cunning. Use the tools to undo the tools. Set your phone's home screen to a blank page. Bury every app that grows your audience or shortens your attention. Schedule dumb phone hours, where your smartphone becomes a literal phone, calls and texts only. Establish no score zones in your life. Work done with no analytics. Conversations with no receipts. Art with no upload. Replace autoplay with autostop. You must press play again to proceed. The friction you add is a friendship you restore, the friendship with your own threshold. Next, negotiate with fear instead of obeying it. The fear is simple. If you step away, you will be erased. Answer it with evidence. Keep a small ledger titled, "What Returned When I Left?" Track the improvements when you disappear for an hour. The idea that found you. The apology you could finally write, the sudden clarity about a decision, the way your daughter's story at dinner became textured because you had the bandwidth to hear it. Your nervous system needs proof. Supply it. Practice boredom reps, like a runner strengthens calves on a staircase. Choose humbling arenas, wait lines, park benches, the 5 minutes after parking before entering the building. Do nothing there. Not mindfulness with an app rating your calm, just presence, trained by ungraded minutes. The mind, deprived of constant novelty, begins to forage locally. It notices the slant of light on a brick, the choreography of sparrows, the thought you've barred at the door that now comes home without knocking. Presence breeds patience. Patience breeds discernment. Discernment redeems desire from imitation. Another insurgent tactic is negative visualization, borrowed from the Stoics and refined by your circumstances. Picture, vividly, the costs of a life without solitude, the flayed attention, the borrowed opinions, the restless wanting, the performative love. Let the picture sicken you enough to act, then invert it. Imagine the dignity of a day that contains rooms with doors. Imagine ideas arriving like weather, not like notifications. Imagine the mercy of not translating every experience into content. Hold that double image the way sailors hold 2 stars to plot a course, one to avoid, one to aim for. Reform your friendships under the banner of depth. Propose no phone walks, where conversation wanders until it finds a hill to climb. Share paragraphs with each other instead of links. Trade long letters once a month. Create small covenants that reward presence. a weekly meal where the rule is unhurried talking, a reading group where nobody performs erudition and everyone confesses confusion. Solitude does not abolish community, it fertilizes it. The friendships forged in quiet can withstand the noise. Rebellion has an economic layer too. Reclaim your labor from the auction. Identify one task each week that you currently do for applause, and do it for mastery instead. Measure progress by craft markers, not clicks, but competence. Cleaner code, tighter paragraphs, truer brushstrokes, more graceful negotiations. Keep a craft ledger where you log the hours invested in getting better at something nobody can like for you. The ledger is a mirror that refuses popularity as a proxy for worth. Then build a sanctuary in space as well as time. It doesn't have to be a cabin. A chair will do, a corner of a table, a patch of floor by a window. Stock it with items that slow you down. Paper, pen, a book that resists skimming, a plant that demands weeks instead of seconds. Name the sanctuary. Yes, literally. Names confer reality. When you say, "I'm going to the listening room," or the workshop, or the little chapel, your mind bows to the ritual. The place becomes a character in your life, an ally. Let it collect traces of your attention until the air itself teaches you how to sit. You'll need a doctrine of refusal. Freedom is as much subtraction as permission. Write a list titled, "Things I No Longer Owe." You no longer owe immediate replies. You no longer owe commentary on every event. You no longer owe a public post for every private joy. You no longer owe your outrage to the marketplace. Place the list where you can see it. Add to it. Read it aloud until the syllables grow teeth. No is not hostility. It is border maintenance for a country you hope to keep. Expect relapse. Rebellion is not a clean line, it's a spiral. You'll declare a monastic hour and vandalize it by habit. You'll sit to read and find yourself wondering how the paragraph looks as a screenshot. Forgive quickly. Begin again, not with shame, but with craft. The point is not purity. The point is capacity. Over time, the interior room becomes easier to enter because you have trained the doorknob into your hand. Finally, learn to consecrate your attention. Treat it as priestly. Before you begin a task, mark it with a sentence. I am about to give my life to this hour. That is not melodrama, it is accounting. Your life is an adding up of hours, and attention is how they are spent. When you spend them by choice, even the humble tasks shine. When you spend them by reflex, even the shining tasks dull. Do these things and you will feel a shift that is hard to market and easy to recognize. The interior noise lowers. The thinness thickens. The dissolved self recollects like mercury, gathering into a weight that can hold a promise. You do not become antisocial. You become anchored. The world remains loud, but you are less recruitable by its panic. You carry a private bench wherever you go. And yet, if you stop here, with rituals and timers and wise refusals, you might mistake practice for purpose. The rebellion is a method. What is it for? Solitude is not an end in itself, it is a doorway. The question waiting on the other side is older than your feed, older than your fears, older even than your name. Step through, and you will meet the final difficult gift. The one revelation that makes sense of all the others, that turns abstention into direction. Ready yourself. We are about to name it. You step through, and the room on the other side is not a cathedral or a seminar. It's a clearing. Wind moves through grasses that don't ask you to respond. A sky extends without comment. And in this unspectacular vastness, you finally hear the sentence that has been stalking you in pieces for years. A sentence that feels less like information and more like recognition. Solitude is not the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. You stand very still as the meaning widens. For so long, you believed that being alone was a subtraction. Friends, minus. Messages, minus. Applause, minus. But here, you discover it as an addition, a thickening, the way broth becomes soup when it's allowed to simmer. In solitude, nothing essential leaves you. Instead, what is not you evaporates. The performance fog burns off. The mimetic appetites go quiet, like insects at dusk. What remains is the person who was trying, with limited tools and excellent intentions, to live your life on your behalf. You thank that stand-in and let them rest. You have arrived to take the role back. The revelation lands with an ordinary clarity that refuses theatrics. You cannot outsource your becoming. Algorithms may suggest, mentors may guide, lovers may mirror, communities may carry you for seasons, but the act of becoming is artisanal and cannot be mass-produced. Solitude is the workshop where this labor happens, and there is a cost to never entering the workshop. Your life will be a collage of other people's urgencies, and your conscience will become fluent in a language you do not love. Listen closely now. The truth doesn't flatter, and it doesn't negotiate. It tells you that the war against solitude was, at root, a war against accountability. Because as long as you stay drowning in noise, you can claim the riptide made your choices. In quiet, the mirror is too precise to lie to. You hear the unpurchased wants. You meet the avoided griefs. You feel the clean pull of a destiny that is not dramatic, not branded, but unmistakably yours. And with that awareness, excuses don't survive. You either move toward what you know, or you betray it. The last defense collapses. The last defense was, I didn't have time. You do. You are time. The realization deepens into paradox. The more present you are to yourself, the more available you become to others. Solitude is not a moat. It is irrigation. When you sit alone long enough to know your motives, your yeses stop leaking and your nos stop bleeding. You bring a whole person to the table. A person who can listen without drafting a tweet in the background, who can love without turning love into a stage, who can disagree without performing contempt for an invisible crowd. The culture told you, belonging required constant presence. Solitude shows you that belonging requires recognizable presence, the kind that carries a name beneath the handle. Another truth rises behind the first, as if it had been waiting for the moment your pulse slowed. Meaning isn't found by surveying the world for larger spectacles. It is made by sacrificing your attention to what you already love. Not the grand cinematic love that comes pre-scored, but the sober love that accrues from tending your craft, tending a child's question, tending a body with a walk, tending a sentence until it stops lying. You feared solitude would shrink your life. It expands it by teaching you to invest depth where breadth cannot go. And then the ground under your feet offers the most stubborn lesson of all. Reality is not urgent. The forest does not refresh. The stars do not request permission to continue. Gravity has no notifications. The heart's long work, repair, forgiveness, maturation, moves at a terrestrial tempo. You can try to hurry these processes, but you will only bruise them. Solitude recalibrates your pace to match the world that actually is, not the one that yanks. It reintroduces you to patience as a technology older than every screen. You notice that your fear of being forgotten has lost mass. Where did it go? It dissolved when you replaced visibility with vow. In solitude, you make vows no algorithm can witness. I will pursue work that outlasts approval. I will treat attention as a sacrament. I will not confuse broadcast with offering. I will remember that dignity thrives on the unmeasured. These are not slogans. They are scaffolding. They let you build a life that can hold weight, even the weight of suffering, without collapsing into noise. Now a quieter revelation. Grief is one of solitude's secret teachers. You have losses still wearing borrowed costumes. Workaholism, sarcasm, fatigue. In the clearing, the costumes loosen. Grief steps forward without makeup and asks for a chair. You give it one. It sits. It tells you what it has been trying to save by interrupting you. Tenderness. The capacity to let the world touch you without immediately translating the touch into content. Solitude restores that membrane. It hurts. It also heals in ways productivity never will. You test the truth with practice. You hold still for 10 minutes and discover that silence is textured, almost musical. You write a letter you should have written years ago, and the pen leaves a heat trail. You walk without headphones and realize the neighborhood contains seasons of scent you've missed for decades. None of this is dramatic. That's the point. Meaning returns not as fireworks, but as groundwater. It raises everything by inches. And because it is subterranean, it is drought-resistant. But a revelation should not leave you intoxicated. It should leave you enlisted. The war against solitude will continue around you. Rooms designed to keep you glancing. Systems that monetize your agitation. Leaders who prefer citizens who cannot abide a paragraph. Your task is not to flee the world. It is to become the kind of person a noisy world cannot easily use. The clearing isn't a retreat from responsibility. It is the place where responsibility is chosen, not coerced. From here, you re-enter with a different contract. You'll participate, yes, but as an owner of your attention, rather than a renter. And what of purpose? The question that sends so many of your hours wandering. Solitude will not deliver a billboard. It will hand you a compass you must check daily. The needle points toward the intersection of what you're uniquely equipped to give and what reality genuinely needs, not what it loudly demands. You'll recognize the path because it requires courage, but not contortion. Your days will start to rhyme, not repeat, but rhyme, as choices compose a rhythm that your body trusts. This steadiness is not glamorous. It is better. It is survivable. One last unveiling, and it may be the hardest. You will never eliminate loneliness entirely, and you aren't meant to. A portion of loneliness is the signature of being a self. You honor it by refusing to anesthetize it into distraction. In solitude, loneliness becomes a bell, not a verdict. It rings to remind you that you are separate enough to love what is other, and singular enough to bring something unrepeatable to the commons. When you hear it, you will not panic. You will nod, and you will work. So here you are in the clearing, with an ordinary sky and a long afternoon that will not grade you. What will you do? You could begin small and honest. Choose a chair and give it a name. Keep a promise you've been postponing because there was no audience to applaud it. Learn the difference between sharing and showing. Let one practice stay secret until it becomes strong. When panic arrives, and it will, let it pass through you like weather, while you keep your appointment with the hour. And when evening comes, step outside and let the night instruct you in scale. You are not the center, which is a relief. You are a steward, which is a calling. If you hold to this, something incremental and irreversible will occur. Your attention will become heavy enough to anchor choices. Your speech will thin until only the necessary remains. People will feel quieter around you without knowing why. You will not be less connected. You will be differently connected, as if the cords were woven through bone instead of buzzing on the skin. Work will slow to the speed of honesty, and then, strangely, accelerate, because it no longer argues with itself. Love will stop asking for witnesses, and your days, which used to vanish into a glare of obligations, will begin to develop shadows, and in those shadows you will see shape. Imagine this as you began. You wake before dawn. The room is dark and friendly. The phone waits where you left it, unoffended. You sit on the edge of the bed and listen for a minute to the quiet factory of your body, to the machinery that keeps you. No one is asking for you yet. You are here anyway. The old fear whispers, "What if they forget you?" And a new, steadier voice answers, "What if I remember me?" You stand, and the day begins, not as a feed, but as a field. And you cross it with the slow, precise steps of someone who has ceased waging war on the very condition that makes wisdom possible.